We are going to be playing around a lot in this class with primary sources. And if you need a little bit of a refresher, a primary source is something produced by a group of individuals that we are studying in the time and place that we studied. So this could be anything from diaries to letters to legal codes to pictures and illustrations and statues. And why primary sources are particularly valuable for us is that they let us get inside the mind's eye a little bit of individuals we're studying and figure out how they presented themselves. They also let us maybe probe those sources for bias and think about why individuals would present things in the past the way that they did. And most of the sources we're going to look at are going to be written primary sources, but if you know that the written language did not develop until relatively recently, that means that unless you are open to exploring some other types of sources, you really can't begin to imagine what people before the development of a written language thought about, what they valued, what they did. And so I want to use what I've got here linked next to me, or I guess just embedded next to me, to interrogate what some people who lived around 32,000 years ago valued. So if I were to give you just a little bit of information here, that in a place in France named Chauvet, in some caves that are kind of deep down inside the ground, there are these paintings that are put on walls and they are made out of charcoal. If you spend some time looking at this image, you should be able to tell me some things about the people who created it. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to spend about a minute. I'm going to time it here on my watch. And I want you to either type up on your computer or write down in your notepad 3 specific things that you could make valuable or reasonable claims about the people who created this based on what you have in front of you. So really dig into this, probe it, and see what type of evidence you can find from the image to make a decent assertion about people who lived in France 32,000 years ago. A minute starting now. All right, 1 minute is up, and sitting there and staring into a computer screen quietly for a minute is a lot harder than it seems. So let's start with kind of the obvious, right? These are paintings or drawings of animals. So if somebody is drawing an animal, that probably means animals are important to them. We might look and see what types of animals are there. There seem to be horses and something that kind of looks like an ox. Also something that looks like a rhinoceros. And you might say, hey, this is France. There aren't rhinos in France today. So maybe one of the claims that you could make is that the animals that inhabited France 32,000 years ago were probably a lot different than the animals that inhabit it now. So maybe the climate there was different. And if it's things like a rhinoceros, maybe the climate was warmer. You might also step back and say, hey, if they're drawing animals, animals are probably pretty important for them. And maybe you could make a claim about why you think they are important. If there's lots of horses, if it were me and I didn't know anything beyond this, I would be tempted to say horses were really important to them for transportation. But if you did your job reading through the textbook and skimming some of the introductory stuff, you'd know that 30,000 years ago, humans had not domesticated animals. That means that these are wild horses. So maybe you could make the claim that, hey, these animals are important to them for some other reason. Maybe it has to do with food. If you take a look at these drawings, they're pretty good. I don't know that I could draw horses that well. And this is somebody, again, who's living 32,000 years ago. So to get that good probably requires a lot of practice. So that means that the person who drew this had probably been doing it for a long time. And either that meant that they had a lot of spare time, maybe they had a lot of surplus food, or maybe that these skills were valuable enough that somebody bartered with them, traded with them, gave them things to support themselves in order to produce it. You could step back and you could say, hey, what is this drawn with and where is it? It's made with charcoal and it's deep down in a cave. So that tells me that these people had mastered the use of fire. You might think about the necessary collaboration that would go on between groups of people for doing this, suggesting that there isn't just one individual, but many. And if you step back and you spend a little time with what on the surface seems to be kind of a cool old painting, you can learn a lot more about these people. And that's really what I want to challenge you to do with all the sources that we read throughout this semester, is dig in. Say, okay, what do I know about the context in which they live based on the videos and based on the readings that I've had? And why would they focus on what they do and present it the way they do? So that's our first foray into primary source analysis. What I want to do from here is do a quick run through of what happens to humans in the years leading up to the development of early civilizations. From there, we want to think a little bit about what defines a civilization and especially what makes for the spread of civilizations in the Neolithic era. We'll look at another primary source that's kind of a cool one, at least I think it is. And from there, dig into some of the earliest civilizations, especially those of Mesopotamia.